100 women.
I'm in an empty stadium on a sunny Tuesday morning, and the place is deserted. Well, not quite. Down there at the end of the track, a figure's crouching down, ready to sprint. And she's gone past me in a flash. She moves with so much speed and so much grace, and you realise there's a lot of technique in running. What speed was that?
It was 63.
63 seconds?
Yeah.
That's fast.
It's fast. Yeah.
They come into the home straight for the final time. 80 metres to run. The Russian Rusanova on the inside has a metre advantage.
Middle distance runner Yulia Stepanova, maiden name Rusanova, once seemed destined for sporting glory.
Rusanova wins. Vesey in second place. The winning time 1 minute 58.75 seconds. It is fast.
Today, Yulia is far from her once adoring fans. This is a vast, empty stadium, and she's the only person in it. The Russian athlete and her husband and son are isolated, thousands of miles from home, in a country whose language she's having to learn from scratch.
Are we ready? Let's read. Cyrus has worked here for 3 months. Okay.
Do you think you'll ever be able to go back?
Я думаю, что это невозможно. Что нам небезопасно сейчас ехать.
No, I don't think that would be possible. It's too dangerous. Because the way we are portrayed there, we'd be killed.
Killed?
Да, то есть как только мы...
Yes, I'm convinced of that. We'd be dead.
Yulia, I'm going to pick on you again. Number 3.
We have been here 2 hours.
What is that?
Some people have said that you and Yulia, you're traitors to the motherland, that you're anti-Russian. What would you say to that?
We betrayed the Russian doping system, and I'm completely fine with it.
Нет, я не считаю себя предателем, потому что я из страны не вы...
No, I don't see myself as a traitor. I simply revealed a shameful truth that my country doesn't want to confront. And the only reason I told the truth was to try and put a stop to it all.
Побороться.
Yulia Stepanova is the whistleblower who laid bare the dirty secrets of Russian athletics. The evidence she collected about systematic doping led to a ban on Russia's entire track and field team from the Rio Olympics. Yulia's paid for her revelations with her career and her personal security. It's a tale of remarkable twists and turns and extraordinary courage. I'm Lucy Ash, and during this hour here on the BBC World Service, as part of our 100 Women season, I'm telling the story of Yulia Stepanova, the woman who exposed Russian doping. Today, Yulia lives with her husband Vitaly and their 3-year-old son Robert in a small apartment somewhere in the United States. I can't say where for their own safety. Life together has had many ups and downs ever since they first met back in Russia in 2009 at the National Athletics Championships in Cheboksary, a city on the River Volga. Yulia was a promising young runner. Vitaly was working for the Russian anti-doping watchdog, RUSADA.
Он проводил outreach, то есть они зазывали спортсменов.
He did this outreach work. They asked us 20 questions about doping and tasting. And if you answered right, you got a present with the RUSADA logo on it.
Кепка, рюкзак, футболка.
You could choose from a baseball cap, a rucksack or a t-shirt, that kind of thing. Anyway, I went to answer the questions and got my present. Vitaly was standing there next to me. I went up a second time when there was someone else and passed again. And I went a third time and answered all the questions and asked for another present. But Vitaly said, no, that's not allowed. We only give one present for each athlete. No matter how many times you do the questions, we only give one per athlete.
То есть неважно, сколько раз ты проходишь тест, только один подарок.
Vitaly was and still is a stickler for the rules. He'd landed a job at RUSADA when it was first set up, modelled on the WADA, or World Anti-Doping Agency, and he had high hopes for his new role.
I thought that I will be part of the team who will make sure that the country follows anti-doping rules.
And why is it important to you personally that sport should be clean? Is this something you've grown up with?
Yes, in general, if somebody doesn't follow the rules, then it's not a competition.
Vitaly didn't even drink alcohol, but he was intoxicated by the girl asking for an extra goodie bag at his information stand.
Мы с ним просто катались в машине, разговаривали. И
We went for a drive in the car and we chatted. On our first date, we talked about doping. He was saying how there was no doping in Russia, and I was like, what are you talking about? All our athletes are doped. And I told him Rusada helps with the cover-up.
я говорю, а Русада помогает.
He didn't know all that. I thought he'd
В
know.
курсе, оказывается. Я думала, что он в курсе.
I guess what really attracted me to her, she was honest with me. You know, I was being enthusiastic about doping controls, about education programs that I'm part of. And she listened to me and she smiled and she said, okay, well, you know, as athletes, we see things different. At the end of the first date, we joked that things will never work out between us. I work in an anti-doping organization. She's an athlete who is doping. 2 months later, we got married.
Dear passengers, the next stop is Kursk, city of martial glory.
Down near the Ukrainian border is a city famous for a decisive tank battle in World War II, Kursk. Yulia was born here on the edge of an industrial estate. Her father was a factory worker and a heavy drinker who often beat her mother and the couple's 3 daughters. I've just walked into the Victoria Athletics Club in the southwest of Kursk. A group of teenagers have come in after school to practice the high jump. The mattresses that they're jumping onto look ancient. In fact, this is really quite a shabby building, dirty cream-coloured walls and broken floor tiles. This is where Yulia Stepanova began her athletic career.
Юля пришла заниматься в 13 лет, занималась 3 года.
Yulia came here when she was 13. She trained for 3 years. She ran the 100 meters, 200 meters, and did the high jump.
This is Yelena Ivanova, Yulia's childhood coach.
Да, на тот момент, вот, когда я ее знала, она серьезная была, серьезная.
When I knew her, she took her training seriously. She never missed a session.
Успешно. Она бегала по 2-му разряду.
She was quite good. She ran in the second team. And she was successful, but I wouldn't say she stood out from the other children.
Yulia's childhood was a difficult one. Athletics was her escape.
Я пришла в бег, когда мне было уже 17 лет. И все началось с того, что...
I was 17 when I began running.
Там были соревнования между...
I was at technical college and we had competition with other colleges. I ran the 500 meters and came third. The girl who came first got a medal, and the 2 of us who came second and third got a certificate. But I wanted a medal.
Вот, и мне захотелось получить медаль. Я смотрела Олимпийские игры, и вот очень хорошо помню.
I watched the Olympic Games on TV when I was 14, and I remember seeing our Russian athletes receive their medals. I was so happy for them. And when they cried, I cried too. Our sportsmen and women had got first place. I supported our team. They were so talented. Not just talented, they were like gods.
Что это одаренные люди, что это, не просто люди, это как боги.
What Yulia didn't yet know was that many of those she so adored were enhancing their abilities with drugs for themselves and for the state. Thanks in large part to Yulia, we now know about a systematic culture of cheating in Russia. Vasily Parnyakov is a retired Russian track and field athlete turned commentator.
The root of it lie in Soviet sport, because all Soviet sportsmen were state employees, like civil servants, not as a public figure who served sport or sportsmen. And in a Russian sports system, there is very small space for individuality. It is a little bit like an army.
But if sport is for the glory of the Russian motherland, says Mr. Parnyakov, many individual athletes see nothing wrong with taking a shortcut to victory.
People don't understand what doping is. They think it is like drugs for musicians. Why Jim Morrison could sing drunk and why athletes couldn't run under steroids.
So basically a lot of people in Russia think there's nothing wrong with doping.
Yes, it is just free choice. I want to smoke, I'm smoking. You don't smoke, okay, don't smoke. They look on doping like that.
Yulia was spotted by the best coach in her region, Vladimir Mokhnev. She had natural ability and was getting faster all the time. But even so, she says she noticed other girls always beat her. Then, in 2006, she became ill with a lung infection. It was a seminal moment in her life.
Я вышла из больницы через 3 месяца.
I came out of hospital after 3 months, and my coach consulted the doctor to see if I could go right back to training or if I need steroids. And the doctor said, yes, steroids would help my body to fight the illness. So then, in winter 2007, my coach started giving me testosterone injections. 1 milliliter divided into doses of 7.
Когда он мне его делал, да, я думала, что мне это поможет.
When he gave it to me, I just thought it would help me with the illness, give me strength for my training.
But you knew back then, didn't you, that this medication was banned?
Да, я знала, что это запрещенный препарат.
Yes, but my coach prepared me well, because he told me stories about how it's normal. He told me how his former students had used it, and how they'd won medals for Russia. So it wasn't made out to be anything bad.
And you believed him?
А как я могла не верить?
Yes, why shouldn't I believe him? I didn't know any difference.
Vladimir Mokhnev has denied the allegations made against him, but Yulia says the whole system was stacked in favour of coaches and that some charged cash for the banned drugs, and for athletes winning prizes too, and even for bribes to officials not to disclose positive drug tests. For now, though, Yulia was comparatively naive. As time went on, she says her coach started giving her anabolic steroid pills as well as injections, a claim he also denies.
Без тестостерона я бежала 2:11.
Before I had testosterone, I had a time of 2:11 for the 800 meters. But after the injections, it was 2 minutes, 8.46. So 3 seconds. It's a big difference.
Нет, 3 секунды.
With that time, I could have got into the national finals.
В России, по моему возрасту, можно было в финал попадать.
I've always presumed a lot of the performances from particularly the 800-metre Russian women were sometimes a little bit too good to be true.
Jenny Meadows, Britain's best middle distance runner at that time.
I would always just say, oh, the Russian athlete will be superb. But it was almost every year or every 2 years, there was a new influx of Russian athletes and they'd come for 1-2 years and they'd go away again. We'd always think, why are they only lasting 1 or 2 years?
Did you talk to them?
No, not really. It was almost like they were unattainable, you know, I would put them on a pedestal.
Little did anyone outside the sporting establishment know why Russian stars burn so bright but for such a short time. Yulia herself was only beginning to understand how the system worked and what she had let herself in for.
Следующий сезон 2008 года в помещении я выиграла.
In 2008, the next season, I won the national juniors with the time of 2 minutes, 1.86. That was when I was noticed and brought into the team.
Получается, заметили, взяли в сборную.
Imagine, at 22 years old, being selected to run for your country. It was a dream come true, and scarcely any wonder that Yulia did whatever her coaches told her. Except now, the stakes were higher.
Когда я находилась на российских сборах, то есть туда могла приехать инспекция, допинг-инспекция.
On the Russian national team, we had inspections for doping, a checkup. My coach gave me the pills after the inspectors had gone. But every night, I'd have this nightmare that the inspector came back, because at that time I didn't know how it worked. I didn't realize that the management was in on it, that you are allowed to take drugs, and that even if you are caught, you won't be disqualified if your coach has connections. I didn't know that if he can bribe the management, they'll make it disappear. I didn't know any of these details. So for those 7 days, I had that same nightmare every night and couldn't wait for the team training to finish so I could get out of there.
Ждала, когда же этот сбор закончится, чтобы можно было поскорее с него уехать.
So that means that deep down you knew it was wrong. Even if everyone else was doing it, you knew it wasn't right.
Когда вот я принимала эти запрещенные препараты, в тот момент я думала то, что
Well, when I took the banned substances, I was thinking that I needed to do it because I didn't do much sport as a child, because I'd come to it so late. So in order to achieve the same level as others, I needed to do it. That's what I was thinking back then. And I was hoping that if I got into the national team, I'd see that our team members, that they were training differently. I really hope that was so.
Я очень на это надеялась.
But such hopes were in vain. In fact, Yulia recalls warning signs early on.
Я также помню один момент. Русада раздавала футболки.
I remember that Rusada gave out T-shirts that said, "I'm for clean and honest sport." And they put this T-shirt on when I was on a trip with the team. And I was sitting with 2 other athletes. And one of them looked at my T-shirt and said, "Are you serious?" And I was like, "It's a nice T-shirt, it's funny. What does it matter what it says?" And he said, "You'd be better off not wearing that around here."
Ты лучше не носи ее на сборе.
Bit by bit, Yulia's youthful innocence was being extinguished. In 2009, she met Vitali, the idealistic Rusada anti-doping official, and married him. But they started quarrelling about doping on their honeymoon.
Those years from the end of 2009 until the beginning of 2013, there's really no logical explanation how we got through it. And the situation was more complicated because at the same time during those years when we were on different sides, I was informing Wada about what was happening. Unfortunately, Wada was not in the position to do anything at that time.
Did Yulia know that you were writing to Wada about her?
Those were difficult issues. She knew that I'm communicating, but she never even really asked what I'm writing. She didn't even want to know.
But you were basically informing on your own wife.
That's correct, yes.
In 2010, Yulia was sent to see Dr. Sergei Portugalov, former deputy director of the Scientific Centre of Physical Culture and Sport. He's since been named by the World Anti-Doping Agency as a key supplier of illegal drugs and accused of covering up positive doping tests in exchange for cash, allegations he's not responded to. At the time, says Yulia, many ambitious athletes wanted to be on one of his so-called courses. She was taking EPO, a hormone used to stimulate her red blood cell count, plus testosterone and steroids.
Если тренер мне до этого давал ЭПО делать дозировкой 2 единицы и через день.
Whereas before my coach gave me a dose of 1 or 2 units of EPO every other day, Portugalov said I should take 4 units straight off. That was a big dose. And my previous coach had given me 1 ampule of testosterone to be taken in 7 parts, which wasn't much at all. But Portugalov said, "We'll give you half an ampule every other day." So he put me on a big dose straight away.
Apart from his disregard for athletes' health, the most remarkable thing about Dr. Portugalov was his candour. His office was in the same complex as the Russian laboratory used to test athletes for doping. And Yulia says he was able to intercept positive samples.
Когда я к нему приходила, я была в шоке, как все это происходит. То есть я
When I first came to him, I was just in shock at what was happening. He said I could take part in Russian championship and be dirty. I was sitting there with my eyes popping out, saying, "What? I can't be dirty, I'll be caught. If I get first place, or even second or third, I'll definitely be tested." And he said, "Don't worry, even if you are tested, just send me the number of your test results and I'll sort it. So you can sleep sound."
свои пробы, и все, и спишь спокойно.
Success beckoned for Yulia. At the European Indoor Championships in Paris in 2011, she took the bronze. Britain's Jenny Meadows was also competing and was awarded silver on the day, later upgraded to gold, after another Russian athlete failed a drugs test. By now, she was certain that something was amiss with the Russian team.
I was in great shape going into that competition. I was ranked #1 in Europe and indeed the world. And, I went to that championship in the shape of my life. I led the whole of the race. And towards the end of that race, I got overtook by a Russian competitor.
So how did you feel then?
I went home and watched the television coverage where I actually saw the Russian competitor was actually in last position until 200 metres to go. And I just knew at that point there was no amount of training that somebody could possibly do to actually make up that much ground.
Russia seemed invincible, its athletes unassailable, and its hosting of the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics promised more national glory. Within the country, no one in the sport's governing bodies seemed to care that its athletes were in fact deceiving the world. No one except Vitaly.
Он был в курсе, да, то, что я принимаю запрещенные вещества. То есть мы старались не...
He knew I was taking banned substances, but we tried not to talk about it. He did ask me not to take them. But I said to him, "Who are you, my coach?" And he said, "No." So I said, "Well, don't stick your nose into other people's business then. You do your work and I'll do mine."
Я буду заниматься своими делами.
I was expressing my point of view that she should try to train a different way. And she said, "Well, do you know any other way to train? Do you know any other Russian coach who can train any other way and give me a chance to be an international level athlete?" And of course, I didn't know anybody. I knew that in her situation, in Russia, that's the way she had to act.
Много раз хотели развестись, не понимали друг друга.
We wanted to get a divorce so many times. We didn't understand each other over those 3 years.
3 года.
Yulia and Vitaly very nearly did divorce. But by a twist of fate, the registrar's office was closed when they dropped by to finalise their separation. Meanwhile, in 2011, Vitaly was fired from RUSADA, ostensibly because of routine restructuring. And despite literally hundreds of emails to WADA, they were not interested in his concerns. It seemed like rock bottom.
Even I was starting to think this is how it works. You have to cheat. You want to win, you have to cheat.
All that was about to change, and the result would rock international athletics to its core. Stay with us to find out how Yulia turned on her masters and even her friends to reveal the truth, just after the news.
100 Women.
BBC World Service, welcome back to part 2 of this special programme in our 100 Women season devoted to Yulia Stepanova, the woman who exposed Russian doping. In this half hour, Yulia's decision to go public and the consequences. Yulia Stepanova was destined for greatness as a Russian athlete with a personal best of under 1 minute 57 seconds in the 800 metres. But she was taking performance-enhancing drugs. And she knew that many other Russian athletes were doing the same.
Спортсменов не уважают в России, то есть как бы их используют.
Athletes aren't respected in Russia. They are just used to get medals. You get a medal? Well done. The bosses get a bonus for that. But what happens to you later on? That doesn't interest anyone.
Себе премию заработал. Что будет с тобой дальше? Это никого не интересует.
Yulia's revelations stunned the world, and they've since been vindicated. This summer, Richard McLaren, the independent investigator commissioned by the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, released a report which saw hundreds of Russian athletes banned from the Rio Olympics. The practices he described seemed inspired by Cold War fiction. State security agents disguised as plumbers, bottles of contaminated urine smuggled through secret mouse holes in the wall of a laboratory. But McLaren's second report in early December 2016 was even more damning. He concluded Russia had been systematically cheating for 4 years from 2011 and spoke of an unprecedented attack on the integrity of sport.
For years, international sports competitions have been hijacked by the Russians. Coaches and athletes have been playing on an uneven field. Sports fans and spectators have been deceived. It's time that stops.
For 6 years, Yulia Stepanova was part of that state-sponsored doping system. Then she blew its cover. So what happened to change her mind? As we heard in part 1, her husband Vitaly, who worked for Russia's anti-doping agency, RUSADA, couldn't stop her from taking steroids and other drugs. Vitaly was ignored even when he informed on her and other Russian athletes to international bodies like WADA.
WADA was concerned that, if it comes out, it would not look good that we were helping this Russian whistleblowers to go against the Russian country. And Russian country is paying us $1 million per year. We need that $1 million. All the anti-doping organizations, all the sports organizations basically just told me, you want to fight doping? Do it yourself.
In March 2011, Yulia gave blood for a so-called biological passport, a physiological profile that can show up suspicious abnormalities by comparing an athlete's details over time. It's an alternative to testing for the presence of a specific drug. In this case, Yulia's was abnormal, but she was allowed to carry on training for the World Championships in Daegu in South Korea later that year. At Daegu, though, something odd seems to have happened. The British hopeful Jenny Meadows, who was also running, takes up the story.
Yulia had not run very well in the heats. She'd actually just scraped into the semi-finals as the fastest loser, so she was very, very relieved just to make it to the semi-final. I almost just cast her aside and thought she won't be a threat at all.
Jenny Meadows didn't bargain for the fact that Yulia, running under her maiden name Rusanova, had extra reserves to call on.
I led the whole way in the semi-final, and just at the very end I got overtook by 2 girls, one being Yulia.
Come into the home straight for the final time. 80 metres to run. The Russian Rusanova on the inside has a metre advantage, and Meadows now is...
Of course, I was extremely shocked to see her in front of me.
This is danger for Meadows. Rusanova wins, and Meadows only third. The winning time...
After the event, she looked very guilty, is the only word I could think of. I could just tell in her eyes that she thought she had done me wrong. And I said to my husband, who's also my coach, I said, I think Yulia is actually cheating.
Yeah, that did not go to plan for Jenny Meadows, and she will be kicking herself because she's clearly somebody that will want to be on that podium and deserves to be on that podium.
Was this the moment of Yulia's Damascene conversion from cheat to whistleblower? Certainly what happened next suggests the Russian athlete was troubled by what she was doing.
I watched her compete 2 days later in the final, and she literally just jogged around in 8th position. And I really just think at that point, she thought, this isn't fair, I'm cheating.
Yulia began facing other problems. She was injured and changed her coach. Then, in early 2012, Sergei Portugalov, the infamous doctor who she says supplied her and others with performance-enhancing drugs, suddenly lost interest.
Я ему звонила, а он мне не отвечал. То есть я ему звонила где-то, может быть,
I'd be calling him for 2 weeks before that, and he wouldn't pick up the phone. And finally, I got this text saying he couldn't help me anymore.
With hindsight, it seems the corrupt system of protection for dirty athletes was being withdrawn. Maybe the coaches no longer saw Yulia as medal material. Or perhaps she was punished because her husband Vitaly's dogged insistence on clean sport was getting on people's nerves. Whatever the reason, worse was to come. The injury meant Yulia would not compete in the London Olympics. Her friend Maria Savinova eventually won gold there. Then, training with her new coach Vladimir Kazarin, Yulia was injured again. While recovering from that, she learned she would get a 2-year ban because of those irregularities detected 2 years earlier in her blood passport.
В общем, когда дисквалификация до меня добралась, то есть, получается, как бы такой пинок, и тут, получается, у меня есть выбор.
When it got to the stage, I was disqualified. It was a turning point, and I found I had a choice. I could either go back into the system, even though by then I knew it was wrong, or else I could do the right thing, something my husband had been trying to convince me to do for 3 years. So on 5th of January 2012, I called Vitaly, and it was then that I decided to go down another route, the right route.
Правильный путь.
It was a good feeling. You know, it's always good when you and your wife look in the same direction. The same day I wrote to Wada that she wants to tell the truth and she wants to cooperate. Then 1 month later she wrote a big statement explaining what she took in the past. And she mentioned many different names that were involved in her cover-ups.
I've got a copy of that statement here. It runs to about 10 pages and it covers a period from 2007 to 2012. In here you can find all the drugs that she took, who gave them to her, and there's some quite remarkable claims in here. I'll quote, "1 week before the European Championships, Rusada tested us again. This is called away doping control. It's always requested by the Russian Ministry of Sports to make sure all the athletes going abroad to compete are clean. Of course, if for some reason someone isn't clean at this doping control, then that person stays on the bench." This is incredible stuff, alleging the complicity not just of sports people, but of the highest echelons of the Russian state inside the Ministry of Sports. But even though Yulia sent all this to WADA, it just stayed on a shelf, collecting dust.
Я также понимала прекрасно, что у меня мало доказательств. То есть то, что я передала...
I realized I didn't have much proof, and the fact that I was disqualified meant people wouldn't believe me. I knew that my bosses would say that because I'd been banned, I had an axe to grind, and I was lying.
Я говорю ложь.
So Yulia and her husband hit on a plan that was both simple and extraordinarily audacious. David Walsh is the chief sports writer on the British weekly The Sunday Times, and he knows both Yulia and Vitaly well.
I've been involved in covering sport and doping for maybe 30 years now. And if you said to me, tell me one other athlete who went so out on a limb to expose doping, I couldn't come up with a name that would come within 10 miles of what Yulia Stepanova did. I can never get away from the image of Yulia Stepanova walking into meetings with really high-powered people in Russian sport, bringing in her iPhone, having it in her bag in a way that she could record the conversations. If she's caught doing that, you know, she's going to be in serious trouble.
После того, как меня дисквалифицировали, я пошла, уже стала ходить с телефоном и записывать.
After I was banned, I started recording conversations with the bosses. I taped my coach talking about how doping was being used.
That sounds pretty dangerous.
Телефон у меня был спрятан.
Well, my telephone was hidden, but of course, if they had found out, then yes, I'd have had problems.
Туда у меня были бы проблемы.
Her phone discreetly tucked into an outer pocket of her bag, with the video function rolling, Yulia contrived meetings in which the cream of Russian athletics incriminated themselves.
You know, we're talking about Chief Medical Officer Sergei Portugalov. We're talking about the head coach, Alexei Melnikov. We're talking about Kazarin, the top national coach. We're talking about her own coach. We're talking about Maria Savinova, 800-metre champion in London 2012, who was a great friend to Yulia. And Yulia thought, but Maria is doping. And if I don't expose her because I like her, I'm not behaving in a very honourable way.
We can't use the exact parts of Yulia's footage that involved her coaches, bosses and fellow athletes. They're still subject to some legal appeals. But these tapes could lead to lifetime bans for some Russian athletes, including her friend Maria Savinova. How does she feel about that?
Так получилось, что некоторые спортсмены начинали приводить пример себя.
Sometimes the person I was recording would say that they were taking the drugs, and then they were banned. But I wasn't doing it to get them banned. My aim was just to show that a system of doping in Russia existed. I know what it feels like to be banned, so I didn't want anyone to be banned. But when they were questioned, they could have told the truth. So I don't feel sorry for them.
Поэтому их не жалко.
The astonishing recordings were broadcast in November 2014 in a German TV documentary. Now the World Anti-Doping Agency and others could no longer ignore the Stepanovs' testimony. In its defence, WADA says it didn't have the legal powers to investigate at that time. This cuts little ice with journalist David Walsh.
You know, it's shameful how little support they've got from World Anti-Doping Agency, all the anti-doping bodies, all the sports bodies. The sports bodies really haven't been nearly supportive enough of them.
Sport seems willfully blind to its own failings, he says. And of course not just in Russia.
UCI will ban Lance Armstrong from cycling, and UCI will strip him of his 7 Tour de France titles.
Walsh is the man who brought down Lance Armstrong, perhaps the world's most famous drugs cheat. But his investigation into the Texan cyclist took him several gruelling years. Small wonder then that Yulia's revelations were not welcomed by sports bodies.
If faced with the choice of proceeding with the beautiful lie or digging up the ugly truth, they prefer the beautiful lie. They prefer the champion that everybody acclaims. They think of sponsors, they think of TV ratings, they think of the sports image, they think of the legal challenge that may come from the person they go after. They don't think, let's take this on and root out all the cheats and make our sport clean. That's not how they think.
That's not how they think in Russia either. If the world's sporting authorities were initially lukewarm about Yulia's whistleblowing, her own country was boiling with anger. That's because her exposé finally sparked off a chain of investigations by the World Anti-Doping Agency, which stopped Russian track and field athletes from competing in the Rio Olympics this year. Pole vaulting champion Yelena Isinbayeva is applauded by her fellow athletes as she chokes back the tears in July, just ahead of the Olympics. Today, we in track and field are in the most difficult situation. Banned without evidence, she says. Standing on stage next to her, Vladimir Putin, his face like thunder, says his sportsmen and women are victims of political interference and double standards. The president's spokesman called Yulia a Judas. Back in her hometown of Kursk, there's anger too. People in this industrial city were once proud of the local girl chosen to run for her country, but mentioning her name today isn't always a wise move. I visit her former school, a technical college on the edge of Kursk, to ask if I can meet any of her old teachers. And we're marched off the premises by one livid headmistress. Unsurprisingly, Yulia's mother Luba is keeping her head down and isn't keen on an interview. After her daughter left Russia, she was summoned by her bosses at the hospital where she works. They wanted to know how she could have raised such an unpatriotic daughter. And a neighbour of the family, who's come outside to air her carpets, doesn't hold back when I mention Yulia Stepanova.
She's a traitor. She betrayed our motherland, our Russia. She blackened the government and the whole country, and she was doping herself. She was taking these drugs, and now she wants to look whiter than white. It is bad to sell your country for a few pieces of silver.
Yulia Stepanova did this in return for nothing except grief.
Journalist David Walsh.
She didn't get a reduced ban. She still served her full 2-year suspension. She's been endeavouring to pay the little prize money she won. She's been trying to pay that back, even though they have nothing.
But, you know, people in Russia say Yulia wouldn't have come forward in the first place if she hadn't been caught. She's a hypocrite.
Well, I don't see it like that, I must say. People have kind of, said, oh, well, she's a doper. Well, those people, are showing a huge lack of empathy for where she's come from and what she's done. If they bothered to look closely at her story, they would have nothing but unqualified admiration.
Some people in Kursk do give Yulia the benefit of the doubt. I can't say I'm proud of her, but she did what had to be done, says this young man waiting at the bus stop. Sport should be clean, so I think Yulia Stepanova was right, says a girl out shopping with her mother. She acted according to her conscience, says an older woman in a fur hat. Whatever they say on the streets, though, the official stance to accusations of foul play is clear. Out-and-out denial. That's despite 3 damning World Anti-Doping Agency reports, backed up by lab tests, forensic evidence and testimony from other insiders. But Svetlana Zhurova, a former speed skater and now an MP in the Duma, or the Russian parliament, pours scorn on the idea of state-sponsored doping.
What has the government got to do with it? Do you think that Vladimir Putin controls each sportsperson and says, take these tablets? This is not happening and will never happen.
Они же не пошли в правоохранительные органы Юлия Степанова в России.
Yulia Stepanova didn't go to the police in Russia, did she? She could have come and given her testimony there, but she didn't do that. Why didn't she do that?
Maybe she was scared.
Она боялась. Подождите, а что она боялась? Посмотрите, какие...
Wait, why was she scared? Just look at how many corruption scandals are being investigated here at the moment. We live in different times. This isn't the Soviet Union.
Это не Советский Союз.
But Yulia's revelations have made waves. The lab in which hundreds of samples were covered up or destroyed has been out of action for more than a year and lost its accreditation in April. The parliament has passed a new law which could send drug-pushing coaches to jail. There's been a round of sackings at Vitaly's old workplace, the Russian anti-doping agency. Through gritted teeth, even President Putin has acknowledged there's a problem.
Как говорил, нет худа без добра. Так называемый допинговый скандал, уверен, позволит нам создать в России самую передовую систему борьбы с...
Every cloud has a silver lining, he said in his recent State of the Nation address. And he added that the so-called doping scandal will help Russia to create the most advanced system to fight this evil. But if officials here are serious about reform, shouldn't they be grateful to Yulia Stepanova and her husband? The acting director of RUSADA, Russia's anti-doping agency, sounds ambivalent.
Whistleblowers are not very welcome because in Stalin's era, a lot of people were killed or put in prison because of whistleblowers. In our mentality, whistleblowers are people who used to solve their problems using information that sometimes they don't even have, just creating such information.
But I mean, I would have thought it's pretty obvious what the difference is between someone who says, look, I've got secret recordings of athletes, coaches, doctors, all talking about their doping use, and someone who, in the Stalin era, goes and informs on their next door neighbour and gets them shot by a firing squad. It's pretty different.
Yes, but even sometimes in RUSADA we have information about athletes, and sometimes we check this information and it's a lie. It's a tool to get rid of your competitor. Like if you are tested like several times, you're just more concentrated on doping control than on race. So it can be used as a tool for, not very fair athletes.
The latest WADA report into systematic doping has found that more than 1,000 Russian athletes across 30 sports were involved. Their cheating corrupted the 2012 London Olympics and the 2014 Sochi Winter Games. It was, the report's author said, an institutionalised and disciplined medal-winning conspiracy, exactly as Vitaly had suspected when he first met Yulia back in 2009. RUSADA has now been moved from Ministry of Sport to the Russian Olympic Committee. There's been a law in the Russian parliament saying that doping is a crime. Do you think this is all going to make a difference?
No.
Do you think this is all just talk?
Yes. A circus.
It's a circus?
Yes. The same clowns are running sports in Russia.
How confident are you that it's really possible to have clean sport?
Not confident at all. There are similar things that are happening in other countries, and that's just frustrating, yes.
Doping is corrupt, and it can cause serious long-term physical harm. But the athletes who inject or swallow drugs are not the only victims. On a rainy afternoon at a youth centre in Wigan in the north of England, British runner Jenny Meadows is training a group of teenagers. She retired from athletics earlier this year.
In 2015, I actually still ran 4 of the 5 fastest times of the world indoors. But I think I'd just lost the enjoyment, I'd lost that trust, and I wasn't prepared to push my body any further.
Attempting to match runners on performance-enhancing drugs, Jenny increased her training sessions, got injured and missed the London Olympics. She was retrospectively awarded medals, which had been confiscated from drugs cheats, but it's scant consolation.
This is the gold medal, but I actually have no affinity with this medal whatsoever. All of my career I dreamt of standing on the podium, listening to my own national anthem. I never managed to hear the rendition of God Save Our Queen, never got that moment.
Although Jenny Meadows had a promising career cut short, and she lost out on tens of thousands of pounds of sponsorship money, she doesn't resent Yulia Stepanova. In fact, she praises her.
She was very, very brave, and at the end of the day, we've got Yulia to thank for all of this. She actually gave us the proof, she's actually given us the ammunition, and she's allowed us to be in this situation. Until Yulia came along, we only had suspicion, but we couldn't prove anything.
He loves the swing, doesn't he? He really likes it.
Today, Yulia and Vitaly live in a secret location in the United States with their 3-year-old son, Robert. They fled Russia fearing for their safety and were forced to move again after Yulia's database account was hacked this summer by a Russian cyber espionage group known as the Fancy Bears. Yulia runs in the mornings and spends many afternoons at a local gym. A German coach sends her a weekly training programme by email. She'd hoped to find somebody here to train her, but the local coach turned her down.
It seems she was too afraid and thought if I joined her group, it might cause problems for them.
What kind of problems?
Well, I don't know. They were just scared of being close to us, I suppose. Because this whole scandal over doping in Russia has uncovered all kinds of secrets. Lots of stuff is still coming out. And that's dangerous, so people do worry.
But finally, things are beginning to look up for the young family. Yulia's hoping to qualify for next year's World Athletic Championships in London. And after months of surviving on next to no money, Vitaly has been promised a part-time consultancy role at WADA. It's been difficult, but neither Yulia nor Vitaly say they have any regrets about exposing the cheats.
There is a saying in Russia, if you want to make God smile, tell him your plans. So we try to make the best out of today, and whatever happens in the future, we'll deal with it in the future, yes.
What happened to me, it's not at all what I imagined. I would never have dreamt that I would be living abroad, that I'd leave my hometown and my country. But I think this whole situation has toughened me and made me stronger than I was before.
Yulia Stepanova is being called the greatest whistleblower in the history of sport. And although some Russians might question her motives, she's undoubtedly seen as a hero off the track. A woman who did wrong and decided to do right. A woman whose change of heart cost her dear. But a woman whose legacy will undoubtedly endure in the years to come, fortifying, as it does, the world's resolve to stamp out doping.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.